Next, we have the reason why we're all here. So please welcome Rauli Partanen, CEO at Think Atom and author of the study.
Thank you. And welcome once again, and more people have been slowly dripping in, so that's nice. We have a cocktail event after this, so I was getting a little bit worried because there's stuff for 60 people and there was like 30 people, so you would need to eat a lot and drink a lot. So, but now there's a bit more people, so that's good. Let me just see. So what I will be doing is to go through this study, tell you a little bit, so you don't have to read it, at least not tonight. You get the main idea from me. And then some of the kind of key conclusions and comments. There's going to be some similar slides to the previous one, but it doesn't matter. I'll take a new angle on them. So this was commissioned by the Ecomodernist Society of Finland, which will be introduced a bit later on in the end of our session, and funded by QCF Climate Foundation and the Rodol Foundation. And it was done by Think Atom and me, basically. A couple words about me. I'm a science writer, an analyst, also an environmental activist, and co-founder and CEO of Think Atom. And those are the latest English books that I've published. One of the co-authors is also here, Janne. Nice to see you again. And what about Think Atom? Well, I need to get more room for the publications because they're filling the screen already. But these are the publications that I've done with Think Atom and other people. So it's a non-profit independent think tank and consultancy. And in a nutshell, we try to think how to use nuclear in its various forms to decarbonize different sectors in the economy. So power, heat, and transportation. Why not ammonia for fertilizers and all those things. And you can get all the materials from the net website. Let's get into the study. So the structure. First, we have the key findings, also in Finnish, avainlöydökset. If you're impatient, you should start there. Then we have the introduction. This is pretty much similar message that Kirsti was giving in her presentation. Then I go into kind of why Shipyard Nuclear, so the reasoning for why to look at it as an option to build nuclear, so the potential for cost reduction and scaling. Floating nuclear power plants, a couple chapters on their characteristics, potential benefits, impacts, safety issues, and some of the technology vendors. Then I present the case Finland, so I interviewed a couple dozen Finnish actors and stakeholders asking for their views and comments and ideas on this kind of concept of building floating nuclear power plants in Finland. Then there's the opportunities to make a difference. So the emissions reductions potential that we would have, in which sections I also present the 3 types of floating NPPs from the EPRI study that we will be hearing more in the next presentation. And I do some market analysis, so how big is the market in Finland, in Europe, and then globally. As we learned, the global market is really big, but there's some interesting case studies there as well. And then some next steps and bottlenecks and what kind of policy recommendations I came up with. Good, so you already saw a similar chart to this one. This is actually from EIA from last year. It's their base case for energy consumption in 2050. As you can see, we would be using more fossil fuels than we use today, which is not great, about 180 petawatt hours worth. And there's just on the right corner, you see 1 billion tons of hydrogen. So that's the equivalent energy content that 1 billion tons of hydrogen would have. So I'd say that we need at least that much and maybe 5 times more. But just keep that in mind. So this is another scenario, I'd say this is a progressive, so from this kind of more environmentally focused company. So it has quite similar amount of renewable energy additions, but they assume that energy consumption will actually start declining by 2030, which was not the case in the previous ones. And then fossil fuels would only do half of what we saw in the slide before. But I mean, still we would need a couple billion tons of hydrogen to offset that fossil fuels. So how much energy to build or make 1 billion tons of hydrogen? It's the one on the right side. So on the left we have nuclear in 2020. Next we have wind in 2020 and solar in 2020. And then, as you can see in the right, is 1 billion tons. So remember, we need maybe 5 of those. So there's a lot to do. And this is the Finnish situation. I actually had to update this a bit because last week we heard some news about our land use sector and how carbon has not been getting into those trees as fast as we thought. So it became a lot more difficult to get to carbon neutrality by 2035, which is also now the law here in Finland. So what would we need to do? Well, we need to grow the land use sector carbon emissions sink to at least 10 million tons from a net source of 2 million tons last year. So probably a lot less of loggings, but also accelerating the forest growth by various means. And if we decarbonize the entire energy sector in Finland, like including transportation fuels and stuff like that, it would be minus 34 million tons. So that would be like not a liter of gasoline burned in Finland, basically. And even that would not be enough to achieve this, because this gap here is about 38 million tons. So 80% reduction in 14 years. It used to be 60%, which was kind of very ambitious, but maybe doable. And now it's extremely hard. And I'd say that there's a definite case for a new type of thinking if we want to do something like this. It's going to be really hard. So why Shipyard Nuclear? Well, you saw this one already. This is one of the main reasons why. The cost reduction potential is big, very big. I invited Professor Esa Vakkilainen from LUT, but he couldn't make it, but he did this kind of fast estimate of the levelized cost of electricity for these shipyard nuclear plants, and it's the one in the middle. It's about 31.7 euros per megawatt hour, and that's using 2,500 euros per kilowatt for the capex investments, which is actually quite conservative, as we will learn in the next presentation. So it looks really nice, really good, especially as this is like reliable power that you get. There you go. So let's talk a bit about hydrogen, because that is what we will need to make a lot of. Capacity factor really matters in the cost. So if we go from 93%, which would be a nuclear power plant, and if we go to a good wind farm with 45% capacity factor, and having all the other assumptions staying the same, the price of the hydrogen increases by 80%. And that's significant. And you also saw this one in the previous one. This is what we're looking for. We try to get below 2 and then below 1.5, then below 1 euros or USD per liter, kilogram of hydrogen. And the other thing is the scale. So we have the cost reduction and we have the new type of development and deployment that we can have with shipyards. So a single shipyard in Korea, it is a large one. It's like 5% of the global capacity, so it's a very big one. But it could deliver 40 ships with maybe 500 megawatt reactors per year. So that's 20 gigawatts per year from one shipyard. And if we would use half of the 3 big Finnish shipyards' capacity to build these types of vessels, the addition would be somewhere around 1 Olkiluoto 3 per year, so 1.5 gigawatts, give or take. So it's a definite steps change in the rate of deployment for clean energy. Let's talk a little bit about the benefits and issues that I found. So one of the benefits of nuclear in general is the very small life cycle CO2 and the materials impact. So this is a graph from the latest UNECE life cycle emission study that came out, I think it was last year. So in the top you have conventional light water reactor in Europe. It's about 6 grams per kilowatt hour. Given that these ships don't need any concrete or stuff like that, and much less materials from that point of view, it might be even less than that. They also have a small environmental footprint because they don't have any land footprint. You can put them offshore, and when they're finished, you take them out and the site remains in quite good natural condition after that. And you can take them to a central location for decommissioning. Well, they are sited on water because they're built in shipyard and floating, so you don't have issues with cooling water availability. And there's also an asset in the fact that they are mobile, so you can tow them to a different location depending on need. So it might be safety related, might be energy market related, some emergency stuff, or for decommissioning. Then the issues. So the international regulations and legislation on these types of vessels is not complete, but they are complete enough to have pilot projects, for example, in national waters. And I'll give it a few years and maybe they will come up with more of those international stuff as well. As they are, for example, the International Atomic Energy Agency is working on it, yeah. It's hard for us Finns to say those. And there's also the issue of a new type of commercial nuclear. So there it will be a lot of this kind of unknown stuff that we haven't done before, and also in laws and regulations, licensing and stuff like that, but that we need to figure out. So it's not going to be easy, but it's certainly doable. We just need to figure out first what we need to do and then do it. And there's not that many reactor designs that have been designed for this purpose. There's a couple, but we should get more. For example, I know that Torcon has a molten salt reactor, as well as Seaborg here in Europe, based in Denmark. But they're both molten salt reactors, so maybe some countries don't have regulations for those, so maybe you should have also light water reactors and stuff like that. So there's not that many of those, but should be more coming. The current actors that I found when I was digging around in the internet are listed here. I'm not going to read them all to you. You can read them yourself. But Seaborg, Torcon, as mentioned, Rosatom, we all know that they already have a floating nuclear power plant. And then there's a lot of interest in Asia, so like China and South Korea. And here in North Europe, we have Canful Next and Genergetic that are project development companies looking into kind of deploying and developing these floating NPPs. So, what about Finland? Well, the main motivation for this study was that I realized that we actually could have a quite good case to look into this. So we have a good nuclear industry. We are forerunners in the world with spent fuel management. We also have a good shipyard and marine industry, multiple shipyards that would be capable of building these types of vessels. We have a reputable regulator. It's well respected around the world, if a little bit maybe strict, but I guess that's also a good thing when it comes to nuclear. We have a very high public acceptability and political acceptability for both nuclear energy and for climate mitigation. And we have a legislation and regulation reform that is now ongoing in the ministry and STUK, which includes these new types of nuclear and new use cases for nuclear energy. So that's a good place to start thinking these vessels as well. And we have a lot of demand coming for clean energy, and especially for hydrogen, both in Finland and in Europe, as we will learn soon. So what are the opportunities to make a difference? The study represents 3 cases or scenarios for different floating nuclear power plants. And these are taken from the EPRI 2021 study. I do recommend that you go and download and read that. It's really good. So, and they are quite big. So the first one is an ammonia producing 1.2 gigawatt vessel. So it has 2 600 megawatt reactors, and then an ammonia factory, manufacturing plant, produces 1.2 million tons of ammonia a year at something about around $230 per ton, which is below the long-term average cost of ammonia and a lot below the current cost of ammonia. Because the last I checked, ammonia cost more than $1,000 per ton in the beginning of this year, due to the issues that we are having with natural gas and availability and price. Then the second one is a jet fuel producing vessel, a similar size. It would produce 4 million barrels per year at about $82 per barrel. So that's competitive with fossil jet fuel, even without carbon costs or stuff like that. And then there's the multi-product 600 megawatt vessel, which only has 1 reactor. It's a little bit smaller, but it makes electricity, ammonia, and desalinated water. That was the one that Kirsty had a picture of. Yeah. So these, all 3 of these are a little bit big for the Finnish shipyards, but we could likely make a little bit smaller one, like from 300 to 600 megawatts capacity, depending on the shipyard. And these are rough cost estimates for Finland. So the EPRI study, I think it used South Korean shipyards as the assumption. So the Finnish cost, we did a little bit of addition into the cost to bring it maybe more closer to reality. So electricity below $40 per megawatt hour for baseload. You have industrial processes, you could do district heating, desalinated water. We don't need that much, but maybe there's an export market for a ship that goes somewhere near Africa and does that as well. The thing with desalinated water is that it uses the same type of energy source. So hot water at about maybe 90 degrees Celsius, as we do with district heat. So that's very kind of compatible there. And hydrogen at €2 per kilogram, ammonia, jet fuel, all pretty much competitive with current costs and even historical costs. We could lower the costs through using our excellent Mankala model, which lowers the cost of capital. Maybe government support also lowers the cost of capital because it reduces political risk, for example. You could use combined heat and power, which increases the efficiency and therefore lowers the cost of the products. Mass production would lower the cost, so if you start to make dozens of these, you can really invest into the capabilities of the shipyard to make them more efficiently. And then maybe use in the future molten salt reactors to get even lower costs. So we are talking about getting at 2,000 euros per kilowatt, or even below. So what are the things that we could do with this in Finland? Well, obviously we could design and manufacture these vessels, including parts of the supply chain. We could also own and operate these vessels in domestic waters, or maybe in the Baltic Sea, in the North Europe, or in the wider European Union, even in the global markets. We could also operate these for other owners. So first, we sell them the ship, and then we also sell them the operation of the vessel, so that they don't have to. Because there's a lot of countries that would like to have reliable, cheap energy, even through, like from nuclear, for example, but they don't have the capability to operate and handle. They don't have the institutions and all that stuff that you need to run a nuclear program. So this would rapidly increase the rate of their development and decarbonization. So this would enable global adoption. We could also sell decommissioning services. So the nice thing about this ship is that when it's at the end of life, you just tow it to a central location and then take it apart and recycle what you recycle and store what you store, and that's that. So you don't have to bring people into the site wherever in the world that is, in the middle of a forest, and then start hacking at it and decommissioning it. You just bring the vessel into a location and do it there. We could also sell spent fuel management as a package. This would also enable global adoption. And of course, we can send an army of consultants around the world to tell people about how to do these things. So here's a little bit of napkin math on the scale if we make a fleet of these in Finland. So assuming that we would make 1.5 gigawatts of these ships each year, which is doable, about half of the capacity that we have now. One ship has a 30-year lifetime. You have an average selling price of 50 euros per megawatt for power. So the annual fleet sales revenue after 30 years, so after the fleet is kind of fully built, it would be 18 billion. So it's significant, I'd say. Let's look at some of the size of the addressable market in Finland and Europe. So maybe you have followed the news, but European energy policy has not have been great in the last couple of years. There is likely to be demand for hundreds of gigawatts of reliable power around Europe, because they're closing both nuclear power plants and coal plants, and in the future probably also gas plants. And the demand for clean hydrogen already by 2030 is estimated to be between 45 and 100 gigawatts of like power equivalent to make that hydrogen, and much more by 2050. And this data is from Gas Grid's study last year. And I have a case of Belgium in the study. And they might end up needing up to 1.5 gigawatts of new capacity per year for just Belgium in their kind of top case. And then you have the global ammonia market, which is enormous and growing, especially if we start to do global shipping with ammonia instead of bunker fuel and diesel. So you could have 500 gigawatts of capacity just to do that. And then there's also the jet fuel consumption, which could demand 1.6 terawatts of input energy to make. So the market is quite big for a small country. Let's talk a little bit about the emissions reduction potential. So an example ship of 600 megawatts can reduce CO2 per year about 5 million tons if it replaces coal. Half of that if it replaces natural gas. About 1 million ton if it replaces hydrogen that is currently made from natural gas. And between 0.5 and 1.5 million tons replacing liquid fuels, depending on the use case. So, some summary and key findings. Finland will need between 10 to 20 gigawatts of baseload capacity by 2050 to fully decarbonize. There's also a very big international market opportunity, and our shipyard potential is between 1 and 2 gigawatts per year from the three big shipyards plus Pori Offshore for handling some of the nuclear grade components. We will need international partners because, for example, we don't have these types of reactors developed by ourselves, and then we need to buy the fuel for the reactor somewhere. But we have a lot of the pieces of the puzzle already there, and we can also sell valuable services to others. The cost reduction potential compared to land-based nuclear is very large, so you can have 50 to 75% reduction compared to first-of-a-kind projects. And we would be able to produce cost-competitive e-fuels to replace fossils. Europe will need hundreds of gigawatts of new reliable capacity by 2050. And I would say that these would be ready to go during this decade, at least start, if there's sufficient support and interest from the key stakeholders, including, of course, government and politicians. And we have multiple actors and countries already looking into floating nuclear power plants. So I started this study 2 years ago, and almost nobody was thinking or talking about it. But in just the 2 years that I made the study, a lot of new things have been said out loud. And then, for example, South Korea is now looking into making these and stuff like that. And globally, the maritime regulations are advanced enough to have pilot projects, but need a little bit of work to make a full scale. And that's for me. Thank you very much. And then for the next one.
Thank you. This is very promising. We just have to hope now that this study will get a lot of attention in the future. Actually, Rauli and I have been breaking this down into 10 episodes of YouTube videos, so hopefully you'll find it on YouTube later on.